My name is Gene Santarelli. I'm a Lieutenant General retired from the Air Force, and I went into the Air Force in 1966 at the height of the Vietnam War. And that is how my career started. So I had my first mentors were in combat after I'd gone through pilot training and F4 training to end up at Ubon, Thailand. And that is my first story, the one that I wrote about in the Friday Pilot's book, was as a lieutenant at Ubon, Thailand. And I spent, well, let me give you the overview is 32 years on active duty with assignments all around the world. Vietnam, the States, Europe, Southwest Asia, finishing up as the Vice Commander of Pacific Air Forces.
Wow. Let me start at the most important part, in some ways, is you have a passion for aviation. You've had an incredible career in the Air Force and in aviation. Who do you credit or look to that built that spark in you? Or was it just you always looking out the window at the airplanes flying overhead? Or where did your love of aviation come from?
No, started with my older brother, who convinced me that when I got out of college, I was going to end up in Vietnam. And he said, you can live in a foxhole or live at a base and fly an airplane. If they let you fly an airplane, you ought to opt for that. And that's what I did. And when I got into it, that's when I fell in love with it.
And so the culture of your home was that you had an older brother who was kind of saying, here's what's out there.
Yeah.
But eventually you had to make that choice to say, I'm going to make a huge effort to survive pilot training and to get through that and to learn. When do you feel like the spark inside of you started to grow and you're like, you know what, I did this because my brother told me, but now I'm starting to enjoy aviation? When did you first feel like, I like this?
Probably about the 7-year point in my military career. But that was the first time I was able to get out of the Air Force. And I said, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Why don't I just continue doing it? And from there, I was at the 32-year point, and it was time to retire.
And you mentioned, it's funny, at the 7-year point that you wanted to keep going. What was the culture of the Air Force at that time? What was it that made you say, you know what, I'm going to stay in it? Probably wasn't just the flying. Maybe there's some people. What made you say, I'm going to stay in it?
Oh, it was the commanders and mentors I had, starting with those in Vietnam and then throughout my military career. I was blessed to have bosses who were mentors also. And they just kept encouraging me to stay in and to grow with the Air Force.
And I'm always curious about the Air Force culture at that time. I watched these old movies. I know they're just movies, but I see a culture where it's just anything's possible. The Air Force is going into space. They have Vietnam going on, and then there's all these new aircraft. What did it feel like to be a second lieutenant in the Air Force at that time? Or did you just say, look, I just have combat and I'm going to go focus on that?
Yes. Probably the best way to answer that is let me tell you my lieutenant story in Vietnam. I was a backseater in the F-4 Phantom. We were called guys in the back, Gibbs. I was with a night fighting squadron. And I really enjoyed that work because a guy in the back, I felt like I was important to the crew concept in that airplane. One specific day, toward the end of my first combat tour, was July 20, 1969. And when I woke up, before I went to work, I'm kind of trying to go through the wake up mode. And I turned on AFN, the only radio station we had, and I'm listening to the news coverage of Apollo 11 and Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon. And as I listened to that and his statement, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, you know, the thought came to my mind, wonder what this means. Well, I gave that about 5 minutes of thought because it was time to get cleaned up, go down to the squadron, and start preparing for my mission that night. And that meant, you know, planning to stay alive for the next several combat missions to finish my tour and get back to the States. At that time, I was lucky enough to have had a couple of great mentors. My front seat pilot and the ops officer of the squadron, who I flew with quite frequently before he was shot down. And so they were the inspiration for that initial stay with this career.
Because you felt valued and they treated you
I did.
as part of the team.
Yes.
That's good. So we're good. Yep, looking good. And I'll sidetrack for just a moment. The F4 has its own fan club, you know, own following. For those who have not been able to be in aviation and fly the F4, what was the personality of the F4 to you? What was that? You know, every aircraft has a personality. How would you describe flying in the F4?
Sure, it was my first combat airplane, so that brings a special feeling to it. It was not a good airplane. It was the best the Air Force had at that time, but you had to fly it all the time. You could get into trouble with it. And I think the challenge of that is something I enjoyed with the airplane.
That's well said. The T-38 is. Have you flown the T-38?
Yes.
It's good as long as you keep it honed in, and the F-16 is like that as well. Where as long as you keep this within. I sidetracked, but so you went from flying and fighting in Vietnam. Will you describe just a typical mission that you had to fly? You're a night fighter on top of that. What
Sure.
were you hearing? What were you seeing outside the window on your mission?
Our primary mission was interdiction of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I did that in southern North Vietnam and in the non-war that was going on in Laos. Primarily, my flying was in Laos on the years that I was over there. we were we were patrolling the roads at night under flare light. So we would go in two ships and drop flares off the navigation system we had at the time. It was inertial navigation, not very accurate, 5-mile accuracy. So you had to specialize in certain areas, and when the flare lit and you started looking for familiar land features, I called it scientific floundering around. But we were pretty good at it once you dedicated yourself to nights. And I did it for 2 combat tours. I liked it so much.
And who were you interacting with on the radio?
I usually with forward air controllers or just on our own, the 2-ship, back and forth.
And what kinds of radio calls? Was it very disciplined only, like, hey, look, 2 o'clock low, whatever? Or was it, hey, I'm not really finding anything? You know, was it?
We weren't that disciplined back then. And we tended to have conversations to say, where are you, relative to a point on the ground, or a light on the ground, or a fire on the ground, to try and direct one another, either the flare dropper or the bomb dropper, to where we thought the target was.
Okay.
And if they started shooting at us, we knew there was something valuable, and that usually attracted us. So we would fly to the gunfire, because that's about all we had, the best indicator we had that there was something worthwhile there.
And so there's a 2-ship of Phantoms. Were
Yeah.
you in just a big wheel?
Yes,
And were you at-
usually in a wheel.
okay. And did you
Or-
guys like to be at the 12 to 14,000 or low or?
We would go, depending on the audience or the ordnance, we were at medium altitude, and then the flare dropper had to be lower to get the flares to burn for the right time.
Okay. And so you start to see these tracers come up. You know that there's something valuable down there. Will you describe what happens next as you dive in? What were you doing in the aircraft, either as when you were the pilot later or as the guy at the gib?
Yeah, when I was a gib, my responsibility was try to navigate to the suspected target and then help the pilot meet his bomb dropping conditions by reading out altitudes, checking airspeeds, tell him when he was on speed. When you're the guy up front, you need to try and get your aiming devices, the pipper, on where you think the target is. When you're dealing with a forward air controller, he normally pinpoints the target and then talks you in to dropping the bomb where you think he wants you to drop it.
Okay. Okay. So you come in on a 30
You,
degree.
30-degree dive angle
Okay.
is what we used at night.
Okay. And did you ever feel like you had an extremely close call, or were you hit on any of these strafing missions, or missions rather, ordnance missions?
Oh, there were several I had close calls, too dumb to realize it. And it's usually flying around in all that flak. But
Yeah, and when you finished, how many? Actually, here I can open that for you if you like.
I got it.
You got it. Okay. Good. Looks good. Good. Looks great. And thanks for doing this. This is totally fun. I enjoy it thoroughly.
Sure. And I was hit once
Okay.
when I was a backseater. Yeah, but we didn't know it until we got home. Thank God.
Yeah. Add this one. And then flying like that, you went from. I'm sorry. Where did you grow up?
In Ohio.
Okay. So you went from. Was it a big town or?
No, Canton, Ohio.
Okay. So you went from Canton, Ohio, and now you're this young man in the backseat of an F4 in Vietnam or Laos,
Yeah.
diving down on these things. Did you ever just get back to your room and think, "What in the world am I doing?" Or did you just think this is
Oh,
fun? How did you How did you process that as a young man?
you thought about that frequently. Then you said, I'm doing a job. And I don't want to try to sound heroic, but I knew I had to go to Vietnam. And I looked at it as something my country asked me to do. And I was going to do the best damn job I could,
Well said.
both as a backseater and as a front seater.
And I just have to say thank you for doing that because the stuff I've seen
Oh.
nowadays is nowhere near what you guys went through. So thanks for doing that.
Well,
I appreciate it. I know you guys didn't get the big parades and all that kind of stuff coming home, so bless you for
but
it.
we had a group, guys, like the Friday pilots that we worked with.
Yeah.
Those were the ones, your squadron mates, were the ones you were really trying to please.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were able to go from, and I remember reading this, that it was nice to be in the F4, but it was even better when you could move up front. Will you tell me about
Yeah.
your first times in the front seat of the F4 and what your role was, what your missions were at that time?
Well, once I upgraded, when I went back to Vietnam, I volunteered to be in the night squadron again because I knew what night combat was like. And I knew if you didn't spend your whole career at it, you were not going to be good. So I felt I was better as a front seater than I was as a back seater.
And it's okay to be a pilot right here and just say what you think, but did you enjoy being the air breather?
Oh
up front?
yeah, oh yeah. As I did enjoyed flying the F-15 and flying the F-16 and the A-10.
Yeah, and the A10 has only one option, which is
That's
solo.
right.
So that's really good. Well, I don't want to get too slow because you've done so much, so I'll move forward. When you were through with Vietnam, what were your perspectives at that point? You know, were you like, I've kind of had enough of the Air Force, I've seen what I've seen, and, you know, did you feel like you were hardened up or just, you know, making a decision? I'm
No,
gonna
I
serve the
was
Air Force?
becoming more convinced that this might be a career I want to follow. And it took about 2 or 3 more assignments. And an assignment to Germany convinced me that this is what I wanted to do. And it's when I transitioned to the F-15
Okay.
for one tour.
And were you married at this time?
Uh, yes and no. Yes to the first wife, divorced,
Okay.
and dating the second wife.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'll move on from that. Well, and really the question behind that question is just who was really steering you on, you're in Germany now, you have a brand new aircraft, the F-15, incredible fighter. Was there a home front saying like, this is a lot of your time, can you be at home more, or were you able to put a ton of time into
Oh,
the
I
F-15?
had a dad and mom that said, when are you going to come home and get a real job? And, and they probably did that the first 20 years of my career.
That's that good Ohio
Yeah,
background talking.
that's right.
No, that's a reasonable parent. So, and again, from the aviation perspective, from a pilot's perspective, F4 incredible, but now you're stepping up to the F-15, tons of power,
Yeah.
incredible performance. What was it like the first time you put that all the way to blower and took off in that thing?
And I went, wow, this is an airplane. You know, compared to the F4, it had a lot of power. It had much better maneuverability. And I was teaching air to air at that time in my squadron. I was a squadron weapons officer.
Okay. And you mentioned, I read that you were one of only a few F-15 guys over there, so you kind of had you really
Right.
were doing your own program at the
Yeah,
time. What was your role in the F-15 at that
we
time?
were the first F-15 Oregon squadron, first F-15 wing, and we basically rewrote the war plan based on the F-15's capability. And we were the first new airplane in NATO in years from the U.S. And so we were able to do that.
And obviously we can't get too technical on it, but what do you mean by rewrote the war plan? So we're obviously in the Cold War period. We talked just briefly, big picture. What did the F-15 add to that war plan, or how did the war plan change because of that?
The ability, the radar's ability to find other airplanes. I proposed once that we use it as an AWACS, and I was told to shut up. We are a fighter, we'll go out and kill them. And I went, okay, I got that. But we had such an improved capability over other airplanes. Simple things. We turned our combat air patrols into flying perpendicular to the enemy entrance to flying at them because we could see them. And we were more effective that way. That took a rewrite to the war plans and how the combat air patrols were flown.
And was there talk about now that we have F-15s, we can reduce the number of airplanes, or was it still always just get as many as we can
We were
airborne?
trying to get as many as we can,
Okay,
but our mission was slightly different.
okay, okay. And this is my last question on that topic, is what was the mission of the F-15 on
It
red
was
versus blue?
air defense and air superiority.
So you were going to hang out here and block
That's
incoming.
right. That's right. In Europe, that was the plan.
And this is just a personal feeling, but personal question: how real did the Russian threat feel to you? Was it a kind of like we feel now with Korea, like, well, okay, we understand it's there? How did you feel about the Russian threat?
We thought it was real. The intelligence had not provided us with all the problems Russia had. And so we said, we're looking at an enemy that could outnumber us 2, 3, 4 to 1. And it wasn't until we got the F-15 that we felt that we could contend with that.
Okay. That's news to me. That's incredible. Looking good. It's like an F-16. You have to watch its power
Yeah,
run out on you. Bingo. I can say that. It's okay. You can say that. Well, so you were in Germany flying the F-15. Um, before I get too far in your career, is there a moment in flying that just brought you sheer joy? You know, one of those flights where maybe it was with your friends or something you saw that you can just look back and say that was a really special mission to me.
uh,
Probably not fair over how many aircraft
yeah.
and
I'm not sure there's any one, but my career took me to converting units. I went to F4 to F-15 at Bitburg, and once I had that experience, I swore somebody stamped a C on my forehead that said, assign him to converting units. And then that got me into the F-16
and that's
and the Wild Weasel mission.
okay.
And, and, and I enjoyed flying the F-16, really did.
And what time frame did you go from F-15 to F-16? When was that? Early '80s or
79, then to Staff College, then into the Pentagon, and then back to flying the F-16.
okay? And you were Block 50, 52.
Yeah,
Okay,
and back in Europe
okay,
as a Wild Weasel,
wow. And
and then a commander of the Wild Weasel wing.
and so, what was your number one task in the Wild Weasel? What were you training up to do? Big picture.
To kill SAMs, surface to air missiles. And in the F 16, we were the shooter or the killer. The F 4G was the hunter. It had all this special electronics to find the SAMs, and we had the bomb systems to be fairly accurate. And the F4G would kind of be a forward air controller and direct us to them. That was a rewarding mission.
And is this? I mean, Bosnia wasn't really on the radar yet as a problem. It was like '89 or something like that, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, what was your number one? Were you thinking Russia still, or were you thinking Korea also, practicing for both?
In Europe, it was the old NATO war flight,
Okay, so you really are
and
Cold
it
War.
was Russia.
Okay,
It was Cold War.
okay, okay. And did you have any interaction ever with any Red fighters coming up to meet you to hang out on their side, or?
None that got close enough to threaten.
Yeah, probably in an F-15 or something like that. They're not going
No.
to keep their distance. Now, by this point, you're an experienced leader. You've done your staff tour, as you mentioned. You're back in the F-16. What was your future at that point? Did you now say, instead of I just want to fly, did you start to think about the fact that you were shaping our Air Force? I mean, when did that start to?
Probably as a commander, a wing commander of that Wild Weasel wing. Because then I was competing to become a general officer. And I found out that command became my primary interest, not flying the airplanes.
Yeah, you're a leader. How many people were under you in general?
I had in Europe 3,500 in first time as a commander. When I went back as a numbered Air Force commander, a 2-star, I had 30,000, but we were shrinking Europe at the time.
Okay. It's incredible. I think I've
Yeah.
had 3 people.
Yeah.
And as a lesson learned for being a leader, obviously you've been able to command a lot of people. What was one thing you tried to tell yourself every day to say, to be a good leader, I need to do, or I need to think of this. I need to be a servant leader, or I need to be a, know my people leader. What kind of a leader were you, did you feel like?
Listen is the most important capability a leader can have. Listen to what your people have to say, and then translate it into policy. That was the challenge as a leader and what I enjoyed the most.
Okay. And the Air Force, when you entered in the 60s to when you got out, what was your exit date?
1998,
It's incredible.
yeah,
So from the 60s to 1966, did you say?
66 to 98.
66 to 98 as a 3-star general. This is an unfair question,
Yeah,
but what was the culture from the start to the finish? Did you feel like our Air Force really matured, or that we now had a mission that was clear, or how would you describe the culture shift from the 60s to almost the Gulf War coming up?
early it was top-down leadership. You don't know anything as a young man, just listen. By the time I was a 3-star general, the Air Force had embraced technology and embraced people management and listening to their people. Totally different Air Force in 1998 than in 1966.
And you were there through the entire Reagan administration
Yes,
as well. Did you really see that the ramps fill up with aircraft? Was that a good thing for the Air Force overall?
yes. Yeah, I was there through Carter, who almost broke the services through funding cuts, and then Reagan was a godsend to at least restore military capability and pride in the military. That probably did more than anything.
And I don't want to miss the important statement that you made. In Vietnam, you're getting ready to go to work, and Neil Armstrong lands on the moon, and you pondered for 5 minutes, what does that mean? And then you had the bookend to that. Will you share with us that connection
Yeah.
between the two times?
I'm going to take you to a 2-star story. I'm a numbered Air Force commander, have about 30,000 people working for me, about 9 bases. One of them was Spangdahlem Air Base, and I would go up and fly with them because that was part of my mission as the commander of the numbered Air Force, to evaluate them. And I was flying a strike training mission. And our target was a simulated bridge. And I had an F-16 Block 50 GPS INS. And we are doing a low level to a pop-up attack to attack this small bridge. And you pop up and roll in, and in the gun sight, there's the bridge. You simulate dropping your bombs. You do a couple more bombing runs, flying back home. All of a sudden, I started thinking about Neil Armstrong. And it dawned on me, that's what it was all about. I listened to a guy 240-some thousand miles away on a radio clearer than my F4 radios, and I had difficulty talking to a guy a mile away or 2 miles away. And so I said, the technological advancements that the Air Force embraced is what changed the Air Force to what it was in 1998. And then the leadership principles, listening to your people and teaching them to listen to their people.
Yeah. And that built the Air Force that we have now.
Yes.
So you're the one who built what I got to see as a pilot. So thanks for that too.
Yeah.
We can actually talk to each other.
Yeah.
We can actually find the target. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to ask the most difficult question, in the sense that take your time to think about it, if however much you need, or drink water, whatever you need. But what is the value? Anyone can fly a jet. Well, most people can fly a jet with training. Most people can do a lot of the jobs that are in the middle of training. But the difference as an American flying and fighting in our armed forces, there has to be a certain amount of fortitude and we just got to do the job. You mentioned to yourself, we just have a job to do. I don't want to do it, but we're just going to do it. Will you just talk to me just from your heart of why is it important to just sometimes do stuff you don't want to do?
There's a greater good somewhere. In the military, I thought it was the mission, protection of our country, national defense. And the more I got into it, and the higher up I went in rank, I became more convinced that that was the real reason. I wasn't getting rich at it, and I knew if I got out of the service, I could probably make a better living, but I wouldn't enjoy the work as much as I did in the military, and I wouldn't have the people who were dedicated like me. That probably more than anything else is what kept me in the military, and I think what keeps people volunteering to be in the military. I admire the young men and women today that make the military a career. They don't have the threat of being drafted like I did. It's totally volunteer.
Yeah, it's thoroughly volunteer. Thanks for that. And the other part of it is just shifting gears. There's a joy about pulling the gear up and
Yes.
and leveling off and accelerating and pulling. Will you just talk to me about what is it about aviation, about flying, that puts a smile on your face?
You mentioned that most anybody can be trained to do it. But when you fly, you realize you're doing something that not many other people do. And that gives you a sense of thrill, particularly when you're flying jets. And and that is probably something that sticks with you. And to me, to this day, I miss flying jets. I would do it again tomorrow if I had the opportunity.
Yeah. And if you did have the opportunity, which aircraft would you go back to and say, that's the one I'll fly? I mean, if you could, obviously, but which one would you pick of the many that you've flown?
Uh, that's a difficult question, and I have always dodged it. I have liked all the airplanes, really liked all the airplanes I have flown. F-15 and F-16 were two that I probably liked as much, if not more, than others. F-15 was very good as F-15C and E as a single mission airplane. I wish I had the opportunity to fly the E model that really explored the F-15's bomb dropping capability. The F-16 I liked for its ability to do multiple missions.
Yeah, and very agile. Let me fix this. It's starting to roll off you. Coming up to my last question here. There we go. Kind of just likes to roll. I should have just taped it.
Yeah.
That's all right. We're almost done. There we go. And I'll remember to get that off you. Still rolling here. Looks good. So my last question is, let's say a couple of these children came up to you. They're looking at the plane. They're looking at the stuff, and they say, "Sir, I'd really like to be a pilot. Should I be a pilot?" How would you respond to someone says, "Should I be a pilot?" or "I'm interested in flying"? What advice do you have for me to be a pilot in the Air Force?
Pursue that career until you're convinced that's not what I want to do. There is so much joy and satisfaction in flying high-performance airplanes or flying any airplane that I would encourage them to pursue it.
That's good advice. And my closing question is, looking out the window of out the canopy of your aircraft, is there one view that when you're laying in bed at night or just driving somewhere and thinking, it still sticks with you to this day? Is it tracers at night from Vietnam, or is it something in the Eagle over Europe? Is there one view that you just thought, wow, this is just incredible?
Combat and being shot at and getting over the fear of it. Then getting over the arrogance that comes with beating your adversary and getting the reality of what you're actually surviving. Combat is something that experience is something that I will never forget.
Has your family helped you talk about those times, or do you feel like you're able to just deal with it through faith?
My mother and father had no military experience, so I was the first military career. My older brother had a brief military career and then had to medically retire. So I'm the first one and only one with a military career.
That's good.
And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. And did any of your children go into aviation?
No children. Have nephews and cousins. None of them have, no.
Okay. Well, good. Well, I just want to say thank you for your time. And before I push stop on all this stuff, is there anything else that you feel like you'd like to share about either your career or after your career or in general?
Uh, no, no. For your purpose, I think we have covered the things we need to.
Yeah, you've had an incredible career. I mean, 3 careers in a span
Yeah,
of one. So, I always like hearing about what our Air Force was like, how we got things done.
yeah. Well, let me tell you briefly about my fourth career.
Okay.
After I retired,
Mhm.
I became a mentor for the Air Force, teaching general officers command and control. Did that for 10, 11 years. That was very satisfying. And I enjoyed that as much as being a commander on active duty.
And that was during the old Gulf War, right? So,
Yes,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Uh, so, uh,
Well, actually, I was on active duty during the Gulf War.
okay.
I was here at Davis Monthan
Okay.
and then went over there for 6 months at the end of the war.
Okay. Yeah, they did some pretty good work on Gulf War.
Yeah.
Um, is there any one general who stood out to you as a really great, fantastic? I mean, we had Doolittles and people like that, and Spats and Eaker in the early days. Do we have people like that you saw?
Uh,
Maybe that's not fair.
yes.
Okay.
Chuck Horner, commander during Desert Storm. There's another guy, for me personally, I'm drawing a blank on his name. I'm embarrassed, I can't think of it.
That's all right. Well,
But Horner as a combat commander.
was it Jumper?
Uh, Jumper is more as an equal
Okay. Okay.
to me, so
Okay.
no, Jumper was good,
Okay.
but guys who were senior to me
Okay.
are the ones that that I remember the most.
Okay.
I have a shirt that represents the 8th TAC Fighter Wing, which is the wing that I flew in combat, and the 497th Fighter Squadron, Night Owls, that I flew in combat, both as a backseater and a front seater.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks for that, and